And you know what? We have Charlie on the line. Charlie, thank you for joining the show, especially with this band of characters that we've put together around here. I appreciate you coming on. I'm a Reds guy. We'll talk about the Reds. I want to save that for a minute because we've been talking about the Bengals for just some time. Today, I don't know if you know this, in some sports books, Joe Burrow has become the odds-on favorite to win the MVP. That just came out this morning that I seen. What that means, I don't know. It seems to me, though, that they might know something. Do you read much into that? Have you heard anything? I don't know if there's new news. I assume that there's not, but I'll let you fill us in if there is.
Yeah, just everything that almost speaks for itself almost was just watching Burrow go through what was pretty much his normal pregame warm-up before the preseason game. About 4 hours before the game on Friday, Burrow was planting his feet, moving around the pocket, making deep throws down the field. He was telling trainers that he was working with to kind of simulate different routes so he could make throws outside the numbers. He was making incredible throws, and it was funny. This should come as no surprise. But then when Trevor Siemian and Jake Browning came in and did similar things, of course, Burrow was the quarterback who clearly looked better. He looks like a guy ready to play a game. He looks like a guy ready to help the Bengals win right now. I get this approach since there's still so much time before the start of the season, but it looks like kind of all cannons are firing with Burrow.
You know, Joe Burrow's in a unique situation. Young player, obviously, that's still on his rookie deal. It's been made up a million different ways of what people think should happen or what could happen and whether other guys need to get taken care of first or how they manipulate the salary cap with Joe Burrow's deal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I would be hard-pressed to believe as an outsider, and again, I keep hearkening back to saying I'm an outsider because I'm not a Bengals fan, but I do obviously live in the city. I could not imagine under any scenario that if I'm Joe Burrow's people or his inner circle, that I would allow him to play a single snap in the NFL this year before having a deal done. Do you, in your mind, think that anything changed because of the injury specifically? And do you still think that there's a chance, I guess, in your gut? I know I'm asking for your opinion, which isn't what you usually maybe do in the columns or excuse me, when you do the journalist thing. But in your gut, do you think that a deal gets done before the season starts?
What I don't think happened is that Trey Hendrickson signed his extension and Logan Wilson signed his extension, and they go, sorry, Joe and T, we're out of money, no more flexibility. Talk to you guys next year. Those are decisions that project confidence about the resources they have. And I've always gotten the sense that Joe and T will priority 1 and 2. Burrow's going to play. He would have been full in practice throughout the preseason even if there was no deal done. T's been more limited, but he's actually been more limited, through his entire training camp career, even in other years of his career when he wasn't in a contract year. The Bengals have been very clear about what the plan has always been. They have a long history of investing in multiple wide receivers ever since they had 2 star receivers on the teams in the 80s. And Brian Callahan was in Denver, who had a team with multiple highly paid receivers. And Zach Taylor was in L.A., where they had Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. These are guys who believe in investing in your quarterback, in multiple wide receivers. And again, the supplementary moves that have been made show that there's enough kind of in the pot for it to all get done.
Speaking of investing, the Bengals obviously invested heavily in the offensive line. They bring in Orlando Brown Jr., and perhaps that was the biggest surprise of the offseason. In your mind, there was much made up, at least on this show, last year when it comes to preseasons, its importance, how the offensive line can gel together. They have some obviously new pieces with specifically Orlando Brown. Do you think in what you've seen so far that has been a positive addition? Has he gelled well with the team? And in regards to how has he looked so far?
Orlando Brown looks like the best offensive lineman the Bengals have had in a while, probably the best offensive lineman that Zach Taylor's ever had. His physicality, his athleticism, they have some scheme stuff that they're working on that they specifically feel like they can do because they have a guy like Orlando Brown. What his size can do kind of for the power run game to the left side of the line of scrimmage, what his consistency can do for the play action game out of shotgun, which is something the Bengals really didn't do last year. Now for the preseason and whether or not this unit needs to gel, like last year, and I heard you guys talking about this, who started slow for the Bengals last year? The defense was unbelievable. The receivers were unbelievable. Hayden Hurst hit the ground running right away. Joe Mixon maybe had his 3rd best game of the season in week 1. The people who didn't start slow who did start slow were Burrow and the offensive line. And let's break that down a little further. Burrow had his appendix removed. He couldn't play in the preseason anyway. I actually graded out Kappa and Karras and Volson pretty well for the first 2 games of the season. So really that just leaves Collins and Williams as the guy who started slow. Well, Collins couldn't have played in the preseason anyway because he was hurt. And Williams, it turned out, just wasn't as good of a left tackle as kind of the perception of him around the league was. So I don't know that being on the field in the preseason has a tangible effect for how you play early on, especially when you have a line that's playing at a high level in camp.
Fair enough. One thing that was obviously a concern was the 2 safeties that had left. 2 good safeties at that, and you obviously have replacements that are come in that are relatively new, but there's some high expectations. So far, from the outside looking in, it looks and appears as if things have been going well or progressing in the right direction. Your overall thoughts, have you got any intel from inside the locker room on how that group is being looked at or how they feel about that internally?
It's the question of the season. It's the unknown. So, when the Packers came to town for the joint practice, I knew that would be the one opportunity we'd really get to see the defense, first team, going up against the first team, really showing what it can do. And I spent that whole practice looking at the Bengals safeties. And, then I talked to some people after about how it looked too. And that was a moment. Multiple veterans on the Bengals defense told me this. They looked around and said, not only are things going to be okay, things are going to be good. Dax Hill and Nick Scott won't be Jesse and Vaughn right away. Jesse and Vaughn weren't Jesse and Vaughn right away. But there was more speed and more range in the Bengals safety group than they had. There's also more depth in the Bengals safety group that they had. There's a lot to like from what they showed in the joint practice, what they showed, we spent a lot of time talking about what they did in the preseason game, Dax Hill's pass breakup, Tyson Anderson's 2 picks, Jordan Battle making plays in the backfield and then deep down the field as well. I think probably the most encouraging development of the preseason and training camp has been what you've seen from the Bengals safeties. Again, there will be questions throughout the season, but for everything they could possibly show in training camp in the preseason, frankly, they've aced that test so far.
Well, they play this Friday coming up. The Bengals do against the Falcons in another preseason matchup. Is there anything in particular you had mentioned that you were specifically looking at the safeties during the Packers' little practice there? Is there anything specific you'll be looking at on Friday that you need kind of more clarity on?
Yeah, well, lots of things that certainly you need clarity on. 2 more high-profile ones are quarterback and running back, specifically with the backup spots. Trevor Siemian and Jake Browning, I don't know what the best way to say this is, they have both not taken any strides towards claiming the Bengals' backup quarterback job. They need to play better. And if they don't, the Bengals might need to explore other options if a Brandon Allen becomes available. It is still one of their jobs to lose. A good game from them where they, do things that they didn't do last week. Play on time within the offense, make anticipation plays, be accurate on their throws down the field, pick up protections, getting the snap on time, like stuff like that just didn't happen last week. You need to see that this week, and someone needs to take a step towards taking that job. Running back Chris Evans and Chase Brown, like they're good at different things almost. I think Evans looks right now as a more, not explosive runner, but a better runner probably when you need, I don't know what the best way to say this is. Chris Evans just looked more comfortable running within the Bengals scheme. I think that's the best way to say it. Chase Brown, probably the better overall power runner when you need a yard, also better at making guys miss when he has the ball in his hands. I think you need to see more of them both in pass protection and then more of them in situations doing what the other guy's good at. What's Chase Brown look like on 1st and 10 when he gets situations maybe he didn't get last week? How can the Bengals kind of get a next step from Chris Evans on maybe short yardage runs? How is he looking in pass protection? They need more answers as they come up with a plan at that position.
Do you think Bengals fans at any moment this year are going to look back at a guy that's running in Denver and Samaje Perine and think, I wish we would have held on to him?
Bengals wanted to keep him.
Yeah, but I mean, do you? I guess the question more or less would be: do you think that the guys that have replaced, if you will, Samaje Perine, whether that be Brown or whether it be Evans, or I mean, I know those 2 guys, and Evans specifically doesn't really fit the mold of a Samaje Perine, but do you think that there's a situation where it's going to be kind of long forgotten of Samaje Perine, or is it going to be a hole that's in there in the backfield that they're going to wish, I guess, in a little bit of a way, that they were able to keep him even though he left?
There's a situation where It's the AFC Championship game against the Chiefs, and the Chiefs blitzed L'Jarius Sneed out of the slot on 3rd and 8 in the fourth quarter, and Evans doesn't pick it up, and the Chiefs win the game. That scenario exists. Perine was great at his role, and he was on the field for very important snaps. That was kind of what was interesting about how the Bengals, it never seemed were proactive in bringing in a backup running back at any point this offseason on the veteran market. And then in the draft, I thought they would have, or they were going to take Roschon Johnson in the 3rd round. He would fit that mold, and I think he's got some real upside as well. He's had a nice preseason. They waited until the 5th round, and they also took a guy in Brown who is probably a better power runner, but a less experienced true drop back passing game, also pass protection type back. They didn't draft that type of back. Maybe that becomes a hole or a flaw in the roster. Now, 3rd down back and pass protecting running back is a pretty good, flaw to have. Ask the Ravens how they're feeling about their cornerbacks right now. But that is a real hole the Bengals will probably have to scheme around.
Fair enough. All right. Shifting gears a little bit. One thing I did challenge, Charlie, because I know that you had come on Chatterbox Reds before and you enjoyed the chat. You liked the chat. You enjoyed the chat questions. I told the chat, I don't know if they're going to do it or not, but I told the chat if they asked a good enough question at the end of this segment, I'll give the chat question of the day. So we'll see if they can come up with something. But in the meantime, we'll shift gears over towards the Reds. I don't want to say the wheels start to feel like they're falling off per se, but it definitely feels like the fuel tank is starting to get low. You're around this club a good amount of time. Do you feel like the energy level is significantly different, or I guess maybe not significantly, but different than it was obviously during their run maybe a month and a half ago when it seemed as if nothing could go wrong?
Obviously, the energy level is different when, there's the music playing in the clubhouse and you're winning your 12th straight game compared to, what was at in the post-game clubhouse last night. I don't get a sense that the vibe is different. What is different is the production. Earlier in the season, the Reds, one example that comes to mind, after last night's game, the Reds had more options who were playing better against left-handed pitching. The Reds have India on the IL. Senzel used to be great against lefties. He's now in AAA. Stevenson's in the slump he's in. McClain's had some ups and downs. He's a terrific player. Same with Ellie. Just had ups and downs that come up over the course of a rookie season. Kind of the cat and mouse game they're stuck in right now. Not those guys specifically, but some guys on the team as a whole. You're seeing the waves that, again, naturally come up, and the Reds are kind of looking for those individual answers to click for the offense as a whole to get back to the level it was at. They need more from certain guys, more from the offense as a whole. Again, I don't know that, we could point to a guy or two, but I don't know that it's a team full of drastic, disappointing underperformers, but it's a group of guys that's not hitting at the level they were hitting at in June. And as a result, with an offense that's kind of lost some of that juice and momentum, hitting is contagious, and it's just a little less contagious right now.
Yeah, well, hitting can still be contagious if nobody's hitting. That is true, Charlie. It's almost like the favorite phrase, I believe it was Lombardi who said, "Winning is contagious, but so is losing." Unfortunately, the thing is that might be unfair for you right now that I want to ask about is there's a plethora of guys that are injured and/or are trying to have different variable timetables on when they're going to come back and what impact they'll have when they come back. I don't want to go through them one by one. I'll throw them all out to you, and you can maybe provide substance on whatever ones you think you have the most or best answers for. Lodolo obviously just had a rehab start. Green just had a rehab start. You have Jonathan India, who's frustrated right now. I don't know if you want to shine light on that in regards to what that looks like. And then obviously you have Jake Fraley, who currently, as last I checked, still is a part of that 10-day IL stint. When he's going to come back, certainly there's a plethora of guys that the Reds plan to get back. Do you have any updates on any of those guys, of things that have changed and or the attitude behind their expectation when they come back?
The only thing that's changed is India. That was a fascinating conversation we had with India yesterday, saying things like, I didn't have all the information, basically saying things were mishandled, because if he said this, if he was off his feet and not running for 2 weeks from when he went on the IL, he would have been back yesterday, but he wasn't told that, but that was the information he got when he went to, get a second opinion, which he did over the weekend, and they said, why had you been managing it this way? He says he feels no pain. There are just micro tears that I guess have to heal. But there wasn't any additional damage shown when he got a follow-up MRI. India is yesterday was probably the most frustrated I've seen India. with how this was handled, with how he's not back on the field, with how he's not playing even though he feels no pain. Green probably back on Sunday. Lodolo still on that late August track. They have some off days and stuff, so they'll figure out which day that lines up to being. Fraley, he's still pretty much off his feet. He did some lying down, working on field and ground, or sitting down field and ground balls yesterday, but he's not moving around yet. The Tommy John guys, I'm hearing, don't expect them to come back and save the bullpen, but they're encouraged by their progress. So the Reds are getting healthier. But again, the India lingering IL stint is definitely the most interesting.
What do you expect from the front office? Do you think that the vibe is continued to be, and I know perhaps Nick Krall can't say this out loud. Of course he can't say this out loud, but I just wonder, and again, I'm more or less asking you off of your own kind of personal belief system. This isn't, to be clear before I ask it, a gotcha thing or anything like that. But I just wonder, when you're around guys like Nick Krall, if they put off the attitude that is, hey, listen, I know everybody in the city is super excited about these guys, and they're playing maybe a little bit better than they expected to be played. But the truth is that we still feel confident, and we're not going to change one thing about what we had planned on doing before this year as we move through this year, depending on how close we are to the playoffs or not how close we are to the playoffs. Do you get the sense from the front office and Nick Krall that they're ecstatic or pleased based off what they've seen, and they're okay with the decisions, I guess, that they've continued to make, especially, I guess, not really going out and getting any pieces? And on top of that, David Bell sticking to, if you will, this platoon situation. Do you think that that's a collective effort between David Bell and Nick Krall when it comes to the platoon situation? And is that, I guess, the expectation going forward with some of these guys? And they just know, for lack of a better term, they know that the guys that they're playing with right now probably aren't a part of the future, but they're just going to stick with it because that's just the part of the longer-term plan?
There's a lot there. The platoon. I'll answer the platoon situation first, and then come back kind of with that second part. The platoon situation, I disagreed with the lineup yesterday. I would have Votto and Fraley and Friedel and Benson in there over guys who were called up over the last 2 weeks, even in left-on-left matchups like T.J. Hopkins. They couldn't find an at-bat for him in a week. And then he's starting over Joey Votto. I didn't agree with it. But the flip side is they ended up getting 2 at-bats against righties because you brought them in off the bench. It didn't pan out. But that's a question the Reds will have to answer. The plan as a whole, kind of what do you mean by that? You talking about the trade deadline? You talking about the offseason? You talking about the future, projecting forward? Kind of what do you mean?
I'm saying in regards to the outside noise, and maybe it's a bad question, but I think that many times when we obviously interact with fans on a daily basis, a lot of it is frustration with the standpoint that they made it seem as if this front office should have gone out and done more. When you get behind the scenes, do you get a sense that Nick Krall was frustrated at all that he wasn't able to do more at the deadline? Is kind of what I was getting at. And some of that probably comes off the back of that, he's just maybe in the mindset that he's not really, I don't want to say not worried about the end of this year. He can't say that out loud, but do you get the sense that he just was happy with where they were at and he didn't want to jeopardize anything in the future based off of one singular year?
Nick Krall wanted to make a trade or more trades at the deadline. They wanted to add guys who were rentals or short-term pieces. They, I know some of the names behind the scenes. I've heard that teams were asking for, and I probably wouldn't have made those moves either. What I am more critical of is what they did last offseason. They had very limited financial flexibility from the payroll set by ownership, and as a result, the only pitcher they were able to sign was Luke Weaver to a $2 million deal. Weaver made one start in 2022, and obviously has not been what the Reds needed in 2023. We talk about how the plans changed. Well, the plan back then obviously wasn't for this to be a contending year like it has been, and I think the misreading on what the 2023 season was going to be, you wouldn't have had to give up anything in November for a starting pitcher who the exact same starting pitcher who you could have tried to trade for at the deadline and weren't able to because teams were asking for too much in return. Again, I get why they didn't make a move at the deadline. Again, I probably would have done the same thing with some of the names that were floating around, but kind of what's come back to bite them the most is how they approach the offseason.
All right, last question I have. It's more of a fun question, if anything. How many more fly balls in left field have to be misplayed and not seen before the Reds do something about the 6:40 start times?
I think that's a conversation. And I've heard the 640 at Great American Ballpark is one of the toughest. Like Tommy Pham stood on a soapbox about this. He was talking about how it was ruining his, and this is Tommy. He was great and he spoke his mind. It was ruining his WAR, and it was going to mess him up when he hit free agency in 2023, and all of his defensive runs saved, and he was breaking that down. Like, it's legit. It's very real. I think Spencer Steer's a good left fielder. I think there was nothing he could have done on that ball. And 4 minutes later, the sun was gone. So I think that is a very real conversation.
All right. Well, if anything that you could do to point them in the direction of not doing 6:40 start times would be great, because ultimately I think they did that just because games were lasting 6 hours. I'm being a little facetious. Games were lasting 6 hours, and they made the excuse that they wanted kids to be able to see the end of the game. Well, with the pitch clock, fortunately now, the games don't last nowhere near as long, and I think that the 7 o'clock start times, there's really nothing wrong with them because the games are still over at a reasonable time. But nonetheless, I don't know if we have this yet or not. Do we have a chat question? This is blind, no chat questions?
The only chat question I got is what was Charlie's order at Skyline? What's Charlie's go-to order at Skyline?
There, that's the hard-hitting questions.
My Skyline order is a little unique. I go chili cheese spaghetti in a bun, and I go 3 of them. I've been getting that for about 20 years now.
All right. And then Casey, who is the executive producer of this show, who runs this place, wants to ask you a question. Casey, take it away.
A lot of people are asking about DJ Ivy. Do you think he makes the roster?
I do think he makes the roster. I think he has every tool you could want for kind of a project corner. The preseason opener was not a great showing from him, but I still think he has the type of, again, tools that are hard to find. I think they've been impressed and pleased with kind of how he's worked behind the scenes to develop. He'll probably be the 6th corner this year. It's not a bad 6th corner to have. And overall, I think they're really pleased with that pick.
Is there an odd man out then in the secondary, or do you think most of those guys will make it?
So I have like a color-coded 53-man roster projection where there are locks, there are slots that will get filled that I had in green, and then in white are kind of open roster spots. They'll definitely carry 6 corners. Definitely. That's a lock. 3 starters, obviously, and then I have Ivy as a lock. I have I have Ivy on the roster kind of in green. They'll carry someone like that. They'll carry someone like Jalen Davis, and DJ Turner's a lock. That's who I was forgetting. Now, the question is, will they carry a 7th corner as opposed to a 7th receiver or a 4th running back or a 4th tight end or an extra offensive lineman or something like that? I say yes because I value depth at that position and defensive line and offensive line more than any other position. So I have them going extra there, and that extra guy I have them keeping is Sidney Jones. I think he's probably the one that's the most on the bubble. He's also hurt right now. But kind of who's your 52nd, 53rd man going to be when you're comparing, position A versus position B? I have them going heavy at corner and keeping Sidney Jones.
All right. Charlie the man, appreciate you coming on here and answering insightful questions, I think, from all various topics that are the Bengals and the Reds. I don't know when you sleep, per se, during this time of the year, especially when the Reds are relevant. I would assume that if there's ever a time where the Reds become elite and they play October baseball, your life will be a little bit different.
Well, I guess that'll be more quick Skyline trips. Get more chili cheese.
It will. And again, next time you come on, I'm sure you'll get another hard-hitting question from the chat. So hopefully it made you smile. Hopefully you had a better bright spot in your day from your Skyline order. I don't know what the next one will be, but I'm sure it'll be great.
Well, now I'm on the edge of my seat. Is it
All right. Fair enough. Charlie, thank you for the time, man. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.